Hello again. Welcome to another episode of Leading from Alignment with our good friend John Obolewski, and as promised, a special guest. How are you today, John?
Hey, Jim, I'm doing good. Very excited to have Kyle Isabelli back with us
Right
in
on.
episode 232 today. Kyle did an amazing job in
Yeah.
episode 231. If you didn't get a chance to hear that, please take a minute maybe to pause this one and go back and listen to 231 first. Kyle has been in ministry for about 15 years now. He's been a youth pastor. He is currently a lead pastor, and he's written an incredibly wonderful book called Refined by the Fired, and it chronicles his experience of being unexpectedly fired from his youth pastor position back in 2017. Kyle, welcome back for another go around with us.
Awesome. Thanks, John. Thanks, Jim, for having me today. Appreciate it.
Always.
Kyle,
Yeah. Good to have you.
yeah, I was curious. What are the stats? Like I like stats, I feel at times that statistics kind of give a little bit of oomph to our conversation or
hmm
sometimes the stats answer the question, why does what we're talking about matter? I wonder what are the stats behind forced termination? I don't know if there are stats behind that, but I'm curious if you know.
Sure. There's been a few different studies that different denominations have kind of done their own thing. The most recent one was done, and it's specific to AG type churches in
Okay.
the Texas area. So, but there's a million churches in Texas, so this is still a big sample size. But their study showed that about 1 in 3 pastors at some point in their career have been or have already experienced or were going through a forced resignation
Wow.
or being fired from a church position. So the way I look at it is if there's about 300,000 churches just in the United States alone, and if you just had one pastor per church, which we know that's not the case, but there's just one
Right.
pastor per church, that would be 100,000 pastors that at some point over these last probably 15, 20 years, and maybe even longer, have been forced to resign or have been fired from their church position. So, all that to say is when you get into the six figures number, that's a
Yeah,
lot of
it's
people.
a
And
big
that
number.
means that, yeah, that means that this topic that we're talking about and the experiences that I've had, that many of us have had,
Yeah.
it's probably more than that, but it's definitely something worth talking about and helping people
Yeah.
process
Oh,
and work
yeah.
through.
Yeah, and some of our clients, we've walked alongside them through this experience. And I don't know, I mean, it ranks right up at the top of the
Yeah.
most painful experience that
Yeah.
they've ever had. I remember one of my clients calling me, um, and I he said hello, and that's the last thing he said for 10 minutes.
Mm,
And he sobbed on the other end of
Mm.
that phone line, and such a wonderful young leader. And man, I tell you what, the compassion and the heart, that my heart was just broken for this guy. And you think about that being repeated tens of thousands of times,
yeah.
and
Yeah.
yeah, it's significant. So thanks. That kind of gives us a little bit of the
Yeah.
landscape with this particular issue.
It's funny because as we heard in the last podcast, your situation, you kind of walked in blind, and in a matter of minutes, decisions had already been made, and you were just informed of them. But I know there's people that it isn't a surprise. There's been an ongoing conversation
Mm.
behind closed doors and pockets of people, and they're hearing through the grapevine. And finally, there's 51% or whatever that is, and they have the meeting. Or we jokingly say some churches what we call deacon possessed. They're you got a handful of crusty guys that don't like the new person, whatever. But
Yeah.
regardless of how this happens, there's a myriad of emotions that are understandable and yet are not going to be your friend in processing this, right? So,
Yeah.
could you just explain to us that moment, that shocking moment? Like, what is going? Is it grief? Is it the shock and anger and sadness and acceptance? And
Yeah.
what does that look like in your heart as this is happening, Kyle?
Yeah. It's all of the emotions above that you described.
Yeah,
It's
right.
it's grief, it's shock, it's sadness, it's anger, um and it's not only just anger at your supervisor, it's anger at God. Like, why, how could you let
Mhm.
this happen? How could you have
Right.
put this calling in my heart? And then this is what, like, you're sovereign. You're in
Right.
control. You see how everything is working in this world, and this is what you allowed me to walk into. How
Mhm.
could you be a good God and do this to me? So I think it's an emotional roller coaster for sure. um and I would say what makes it even more difficult is the fact that if you're fired from a church position, you lose your church, you struggle with your
Yeah.
faith, and you lose your a lot of your friends, and you lose your
Yeah.
place of employment. If one of those
Yeah.
big things, um, your church or your work or your friends are removed from your life in some way, shape, or form, you usually have
Mm.
another one to fall on. Um,
Right.
if you lose all three at once,
Mm.
then you're faced with just your faith in Christ and kind of just your close family, and that can be very difficult. And it really begins to question, like, does Jesus love me? Does he care about me? And so I think in that season, what it did for me was, it helped me really focus on what was my identity. My identity is not in
Mm.
my job. My identity is not in my
Right.
friends. My identity is not in my local church community. All those things are wonderful, but my identity really is in Christ. I am a son of the
Yeah.
Most High God. I get to be an heir to the throne of grace. Like, all these different things, like, I had to be reminded of, like, that is the only thing that will satisfy my heart here on this earth,
Right.
is knowing that I am a follower of Jesus and I'm loved by my Father. And so I even all those things were stripped away. It brought me back to that foundational truth of, where do I find my identity? Because it revealed, oh, maybe my identity was a little too attached to my calling, or my identity was a little
Right.
too attached to my church position, or to the people that I was looking for affirmation, or people that thought I was being successful. Like, okay, there is too much of a healthy dependence on that. So it was
Yeah.
hard, especially when you have so many emotions to kind of weave through and work through. But
Mm.
ultimately, the Lord was able to really ground me in what my identity was moving forward.
So good. That's so good. Jim and I have talked, I don't know how many times on the podcast over the last 5 years about identity. We've said phrases like learning how to work from our identity and not for our identity.
Hmm.
That our identity is not what we do for the Lord, it's who we belong to.
Yeah.
That's our identity, our value. Yeah, we had value in our profession with our skill, with our heart and all that. But there's intrinsic value that
Hmm.
has nothing to do with ministry output.
Yep.
Right.
And that comes from belonging to the Lord. And when I tap into that, life is so much better and calmer, and I'm less stressed when I can tap into that. So I just think that's a beautiful outcome for
Hmm.
you, that although you had all of these emotions and they were real, and I'm sure I've never gone through that in a ministry setting, but I'm sure it was painful.
Hmm.
Yet, you're grabbing out of that an identity problem, so to speak, and
Hmm.
and letting Jesus help you with that. So that's really amazing. Um, in the last podcast, you had talked about uh, what did you learn and through the experience, and I just appreciated the self-reflection that you experienced there and manifested there. But I wonder, I want to ask you this. What's the proper tension between looking in the mirror and when something like this happens to you, what's the proper tension between looking in the mirror and accurately assessing the contributions other people have made to this, termination or this firing, this scenario? Um, I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah. So yeah, to even I was thinking about this, even to say it a different way, like, How much is on me and how much is on my boss, or
There
how
you
much
go.
is on me
Right.
and how much is on the leadership. And I think that um, when you start with yourself, it can begin to weed through some of that and
Okay.
be able to get clarity on both sides of it. And so for me, it was okay. What were the ways I fell short in communicating with my supervisor? What were the ways I felt short in not being aligned or not listening well to him? What were the ways in which I came off as a know-it-all or came off as prideful? Let me start there. Let me remove the plank from my own eye before I look for the speck of sawdust in his
Yeah.
eye.
Beautiful.
So that was started there. And I even talk about in the book, sometimes you find out that maybe you did just have a few pieces of sawdust in your eye, and there might be a huge plank in the leadership and the church culture. And that very well be true. You still got to get the sawdust out. You can't see
Mm.
clearly if you got a few specks of sawdust in your own eye. So
Mm.
either it's a huge plank or it's sawdust. You got to get it out first in order to really see things clearly. And so from that, then it was, okay, how do I look at the leadership as a whole and the church as a whole and begin to put myself in their shoes? And when I did that, it helped me to see, okay, well, I could see why they would think that way, or I could see why they would do that. I don't necessarily agree with it, or I don't think that's the healthiest way,
Yeah.
but I could see why maybe they would make those decisions. And then there was, okay, that they really treated me poorly there. This is not a good culture, whatever it is not a good fit or whatever. You can begin to dissect those things, but you humanize your brothers and sisters in Christ who are in leadership over you after you've kind of gotten the stuff out of your own eye first, and then you begin to put yourself in their shoes. And I think for me, being now a senior pastor and having to manage staff, I can understand why sometimes church leaders and elders and different things like that feel this way towards staff or make some of these decisions because of their interactions or because of what they're seeing or perceiving. So now it's like I'm on both sides of the coin, so I can understand both things. In that time, I wasn't there just yet, but as I stepped into more leadership positions, I got more clarity as to, oh, I could see why you feel this way or want to make a decision like this, or the
Yeah.
importance of alignment or importance of everyone being, whatever it is. So but it's in that season, it's got to start with your own heart. It's got to start with the things
Yeah.
that you
Mm.
can work on first and foremost.
I did understand my lead pastor better when I became a lead pastor. That doesn't mean that everything he did was something I was going to emulate or
Correct.
repeat.
Right.
But I did get what I didn't understand as a youth pastor was the weight that that lead pastor was carrying,
Mhm.
and that he had the whole organization in view. And as a youth pastor, I pretty much had my narrow silo in view, and I didn't always understand the ripple effect of decisions that I wanted to happen that would
Mhm.
have across the board. So,
Yep.
yeah, I really appreciate that perspective. I experienced I wasn't let go, but man, when I became a lead pastor, it's like, oh wow, I understand him a lot better.
Yeah.
Mhm. Mhm.
Yeah. My dad was an idiot until I became a father. And then all of a sudden, all of his words came back to me like, oh, I call it the 20-year echo. 20 years after he
Yeah,
told me to turn the music down, I'm telling my kids to turn their music down. I'm like, oh, that sounds really familiar. Where have I heard that phrase before?
that's awesome.
Hey, you talk about being philosophically aligned just a few minutes ago, and kind of so I don't know that in the interview process, interviews are hard, right? There's a resume. It's a beauty contest meets a spelling bee meets a presidential election. And by the time we've elected a winner, I'm not sure we really know each other that well because in some ways we're dating. We're on our best behavior. We all have
Yeah.
something to lose.
Yep.
So, what would you say to somebody that's going into an organization? Like, what are the right questions to ask if you're the senior pastor or
That's a good
you're
one.
the candidate for a position to make sure there's an alignment philosophically? And then, kind of part two of that is, what if you're already there and you realize now, whoops, what they value, I don't really value. What would you say to somebody? Do they change who they are? Do they form an exit strategy? So, speak to that first one though. What are the right questions on both sides of the spectrum to ask to make sure there's an alignment as far as what God's put in your heart and what the needs of that position are?
Yeah. For me, asking the question of what does a win look like? What does success look like
There
in
you go.
ministry? We all want to make disciples. We all want to help people
Yeah,
be like Jesus and become like Jesus and help others do the same. But within our cultural context, there are a lot of different ways that that takes place. And there's a lot of different
yeah,
things as church staff that we can spend our time on doing in order to help people be like Jesus and become like Jesus. So I think having those conversations in earlier on in a interview process of what does it look like, being crystal clear about this is what we expect, these are our priorities,
right,
and communicating to those people who are interviewing for a position. And on the flip side, and this is what really helped me in this season to know which church I wanted to be at next, after I was fired from this position, is I began to see, well, what am I most passionate about? What
right,
excites
right.
me? What is a win for me? How do I define success? How do I want to value my time in ministry? Once I began to really understand itself about myself, it prepared me really well for the interview process. As I shared in the previous interview, I had three different churches that I was candidating at. And by the end of it, we knew that there was one I was going to be at, and part of it had to do
Mm,
with the position, part of it had to do with the supervisors that was there, and part of it had to do with just what I would be doing in the ministry moving forward.
yeah,
And so, but I knew those things about myself, and that helped bring clarity to that. So, yeah, does that help answer that first
yeah.
part of the
Now
question?
the second part is, let's say somebody's listening and they go, man, I really want to sit on a couch. I want to drink coffee. I want to make deep disciples. And another, but there are organizations like, forget the couch. We need the stadium
Yep.
with big events, give
Yep.
away a pony, break bricks with your face every Wednesday night. And
Yeah.
I'm being exaggerative for a reason, but they realize I'm not really, I have to be something other than what I am to do this. What advice would you give? Is that like then they should go, or is that they should learn a new way, or that is they should be honest with their supervisor and risk being fired for having a difference of strategery, or like
Yeah.
what's your thoughts
Yeah.
there?
Yeah, I think this is where a lot of times our American business culture has a poor influence on the church culture.
Thank
Um,
you for
if
saying that.
Yeah,
Yes.
it's just the reality of what it is that we see that differences in ministry alignment and we just cut the cord right away. And I just think
Yeah.
that's the not a Christ-like way of approaching it.
Yeah.
And so I think starting from the beginning, if you are having these ongoing conversations with your supervisor, that is the relationship that's there where you can be honest and share these things. Supervisors, you should lead pastors, you should create that type of environment with your staff where they can
Yeah.
have these honest conversations where they're not afraid of their job because they disagree with you on one thing. Um, and then if you're having these conversations and you're both perceiving these same things, it gives you an opportunity to, number one, see if their passions and giftings can be in a different part of your local church context, part of your church staff. Maybe they're
Yeah.
not going to do things this way because that's not their gifting and passion, but maybe there's a different role on your team that would better fit them. And then if it's not, then it's, well, hey, is this something that you can learn? Is this something that you can grow into? Is this something that you're willing to be coached in?
Right.
And if that's the case, you can walk through that process as well. And then if it's still not the case, I think then you can go to that place of, okay, well, what does it look like here the next 3 to 6 months? How can we help you transition out of here? How can we help you find a new position? I share in the book how a mentor of mine, he was a lead pastor. They had this kind of similar conversation with the youth pastor, and it was a year long, almost a year and a half long process. And so by
Mm,
the end of it, they helped him find a new job outside of church ministry where more of his giftings and passions were at. And they were able to transition well, they were able to send him off well. In that season, they were also able to find a new youth pastor, and that person left well.
right.
They
Sure.
finished strong. They supported the church and the direction that it was going, and also were grateful for the church's help in helping them kind of get to that place of finding a new vocation in life. So I think churches can be grace filled. I think they can be slow in this process. I think they can, be patient because love is patient. They can be kind because love
Yeah.
is kind. And that's why I'm grateful. There are organizations now that I didn't really know about, but two in particular, pastoral transitions out in California, and then Pastors Hope Network down in Texas. And they're just doing some good work to really help churches as well as help
Good.
leaders who are going through transitions kind of navigate those uncharted waters and do things, in my opinion, in a more Christ-like and loving way.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Can I just add one thing, John? And that the
please.
thought is that you mentioned that the business model, the church is a business. Well, the church does business, but the church is not a business. So if it's not a business, what is it? Well, it's a bride. It's a temple that's alive. It's a family. And that sense of family, we don't have employees. The Apostle Paul didn't hire Timothy. He was a father to him. And I
Yep.
think that's a key difference for those of the senior pastors listening that maybe have an underperforming staff member. You fire employees, but you train sons and daughters. You set them up to succeed even in failure. If they just don't want to play the piano, you buy them a guitar. You get them in gymnastics. You do something, but you don't say, oh, you're no longer my child because, right? So
Mhm.
you have to take very seriously what you're doing when you're hiring somebody. You're bringing them into an inner circle of
Mhm.
spiritual family, and you're
Yep.
responsible to them. And
Yeah.
I think that's a better perspective than I hired this guy and he didn't do what I wanted to do, so I fired him. Well, if you own a party store, then maybe you get rid of your cashier that way, but you don't fire your kids that way. So,
Yeah.
and that other part where you said, once I was gone, I kind of fell out of relationship because I think we have to have a deeper relationship in the church than what I used to have with my old drinking buddies. When I quit drinking, I lost all my friends because drinking evidently is what we had in common. We still like the
Mhm.
Lions, even though they were terrible back then. You know what I mean? We still like them anyway. We still like to eat. We still like to ride our motorcycles, whatever. But when I quit drinking, it was like, well, then you're not my friend anymore. And I think it's the same way now. Our relationship can't just be about what you do for me and my organization.
Yep.
I have to value you more than I value what you do. And in doing that, then these relationships can be lifelong. Doesn't mean we talk 8 times a week like we did when we were working together. But if I'm having a Super Bowl party, you're
Yep.
still invited to it. My goodness, you're my neighbor.
Yep.
I if I'm going to go fishing and we're fishing buddies, we should go fishing together because I didn't just love you because you were part of the organization. If I did, then I didn't really love you well.
Mhm.
I more, I don't know, if used the wrong word, but it's pretty close to the right one. So thanks for sharing that. I agree. I think the mindset of this is business and we hire slowly and we fire quickly. Like I get what you're saying, but that's terrible in relationships. And I think a
Yep.
lot of people are losing their faith in the institution of the church because we've made leadership like our key word or something. And leadership's important, but I
Yep.
don't think it's more important than family. I think
Yep.
family is a better indicator of success than leadership. So that's my
Yeah.
2 cents.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, it is good, Jim. And I think we're kind of butting up against time here. So
Yeah,
Jim, I want to kind of leapfrog this next question that I had here, and I'm going to steal your next one,
please. Yeah.
if that's okay. Kyle, I wonder, as you've reflected now on this event or series of events that happened to you, what do you wish your supervisors would have done differently?
Yeah, I would say um, that he would have given me more clarity earlier on of the seriousness of what he thought our differences were. Um,
Okay.
Mm,
in my opinion, these were small things in ministry that we didn't see eye to eye on. What type of event to hold, or what is the success of how we measure an event, or um, how do you want me to value my time? How do you want me to value my small group leaders' time?
Right.
Different things like that. Like,
yeah.
uh, the like to me, like those things, you can shift a few hours here, a few hours there. Um, in my opinion, they were small things, but from his perspective, they were pretty big things. And I didn't know that, and I wish I would have got more clarity on that. And so, um,
Okay.
I think that would have been helpful. And I think supervisors, I've heard this shared now multiple times. You know, I've been on a few different podcasts now. I've read it, I've heard it on other podcasts I just listened to. The phrase that clarity is kindness. Clarity is
Yeah.
It
kindness. And
is
that's
100%.
resonated so much with me. Like I
Yeah.
said, I didn't come up with it, but I've heard it quite a bit now. And that would have been really helpful. And so I think for supervisors moving forward, um, being clear with your expectations, clear with what you value out of your staff is the kindest thing that you can do for them. So I really wish that would have happened. As well, there was, some things we shared in the book that um, it, there were some personal things that my wife and I were going through as she was struggling physically, coming out of some pregnancy and labor complications. And so there was a lack of empathy that we felt from our supervisor, as well as just from others in the leaders, of like, hey, our schedule is crazy. We're going to all these different appointments all the time so my wife can get
Mm.
cared for. And making sure that I'm here in the office until 5, or staying late after 5 to make sure that I'm doing my job. Like, hey, this was prior to COVID. Okay. So we didn't have this idea of work remotely or whatever it is, but just in ministry, your job doesn't happen within the four walls of your office. Like, it happens with people, it happens when you're out and
Right.
about. And so
True.
having a little bit of flexibility and a little bit of grace in our difficult personal season would have been helpful. So
I'd
then,
say
I think
this is
those two
such an
things would have
important
been helpful.
conversation.
Mhm.
It's funny. There's a generational divide right now. My generation being the 50 somethings. Kyle, can I ask how old you are?
35.
35. And even in those 20 years, John, true or false, there's a huge difference between what hard work or success or leadership or,
Yes.
it wasn't that long ago. We were looking at our guys that are in their 70s or with Jesus now. And there's just like, you work and you this and you wear a tie and you sing hymns and transition to why don't we just be relevant? Because we're answering questions people haven't asked for 10 years. And that's why the church is decreasing. Our season of leadership came. And I feel like there's another one, like our season of leadership's declining. And here's this new generation saying, you're not listening to me. It's harder now in different ways than it was when you were me. It was different. So you're answering old questions with old answers. The new questions have new answers. So I've got a young family at home. They need me to be there. Being in an office from 9 to 5 when you're a youth pastor is ridiculous. And the kids aren't allowed to come to your office. What am I supposed to do for 40 hours in an office? My kids are at their sporting events or hanging out or.
Mhm.
So when I'm done with what you've asked me to do, I get to do what I'm called to do. But I've also got this family at home. It's just, I'm just going to say this to the old guys in the room. Listen to the young guys in the room. They're telling you how to be a better leader. And it's incumbent upon us to help them. You say, well, when I was their age, you just identified yourself as a crusty old guy. Don't be that way. We didn't like it when they did that to us. Don't be that way to them. It's our turn.
Yeah.
And in our turn, can we be better than our predecessors, our nightmare stories? Let's not be somebody's nightmare in their story. Let's be a father. Let's be a mother. Let's listen, and where we can bend to be better servants of our staff, then let's bend in those directions. So
Yeah.
anyway, that's now I've had a rant. I've had a message. I've had a thought. And I've had a rant. That is my rant.
And I
Uh,
and I would just add this. I would offer this to anyone who has staff to create a high feedback culture.
Yes. Yeah.
I think we've worked very hard at that at Converge Coaching. Anybody who comes onto our team, that's one of the things we spend a lot of time talking about, that we value
Yeah.
high feedback. And some of that's selfish, Kyle. I don't want to have to be perceptive of everybody on my team and know what's going on in their world, because it's just not possible in our environment. We've got people all over the country that serve on our team. I want them to tell me, hey, if I'm driving you nuts, um, just let me know.
mhm.
If I'm doing something that I told you I wasn't going to do, let me know. If
Mhm.
you see that I'm not living out our values, I want you to let me know. Now, I'm going to do that with you too,
Yeah.
by the way.
Mm.
It goes two ways, but I think that life is too short to operate in an organization where there's not honesty. And
Yeah.
you don't have to be a jerk about it. You wrap it with love and respect. But I think a high feedback culture creates the conditions for a church, an organization, even a business to
Mhm.
really reach its God-given potential.
Yeah.
What do you think about that point, Kyle? I'm interested in your thoughts on that.
Yeah, I would say, I think ultimately, John and Jim, even kind of just the your rant as well. Um, just trying to think of how to say this clearly.
It's a private conversation. It's just between us,
Yeah,
Kyle. Take
no,
all the pressure off.
yeah, no, I just try to think about where I'm at today, being a senior pastor now for the last 4 years. Even when I stepped into my new youth pastor role back in 2017 at the church I'm still at today, even as a 28-year-old and now supervising one person on staff, it was so easy to flip the switch. Like I just got it right away. Like this is why supervisors think this way. This is why we
Right.
sometimes go down this route. This is why, like, well, if you just did things my way, it would be a lot easier for you. Like it was like within 3 months of being at my new church, I had some of those thoughts to the one staff person I was overseeing, so
Right.
I was like, I think it's a leadership thing in general, and that's why just being willing to listen to care, being willing to invest in the lives. This is, you guys are saying, invest in the lives of your staff, get to know them, and when you do that, there's more of this natural, organic way of feedback being prevalent. They're more
Yeah.
willing to share their heart with you because they know that you care about them.
Right.
Um,
Right.
100%
and I
right.
think that can go a long way. So yeah, there probably are some generational things when it comes to leaders, but man, these last 7 years of just leading a staff person or now leading multiple staff, I see it in myself as well. I look in the mirror and I think, oh yeah, I can easily go down that same road time and time again.
Yeah.
And so my love and care for the staff creates that culture of feedback because they know they can trust me and they know that they can be honest with me and they know that I have their back and we can be on the same page moving forward.
Beautiful. Beautiful. Well, guys, again, thank you so much for this conversation. This has been great. Kyle, you wrote a great book. People are going to want to read it. Could you tell us a little bit about where we would find that, how to spell your last name, things like that?
Yeah, absolutely. Refined by the Fired. You can find the book anywhere you get your books at. You can find out more about me. My website's kyleisabelli.com. That's ISABELLI.com. I'm on Instagram, Facebook, email, whatever. Would love just to connect with people. And yeah, if you're looking for that book as a good resource, find it on my website or anywhere you get your books.
Right on. And just so everybody knows, when they see your picture, because some people are listening to this, some people are watching it. People that they were believers in the 70s and 80s are going to say, "Oh, he looks like Keith Green." People who are believers in the 2000s are going to say, "Oh, he looks like Screech."
That's
And
right.
people who are not yet believers are going to say he looks like little Dicky. So that's your. I'm quoting you there, right?
Yep,
So
yep. That is the constant comparison. That is
appealing.
that is a generational thing. Leadership, sometimes generations it could that for sure is a
Yeah.
generational
So
thing.
if you're
So
wondering, am I old? If he's Keith Green, you're old. You know, I heard the other day, if you don't know if you're old or not, go to a public place and fall down. If people rush to you and help you up, you're old. If they
yep,
point at you and laugh, you're not. So there's another test for this. And
that's good. I
and
like that.
John, people are going through this, man. The last thing we want is for them to go through
Yeah,
this alone. So how can
that's right.
Converge help people that are going through this?
Yeah, just it's really simple. Go to convergecoach.com, click on the start a conversation button, and that will get you connected to one of our coaches for a 30-minute talk. This type of scenario is way too heavy of a burden for you to
Yeah,
carry by yourself.
yeah,
And just sharing the burden with somebody who's uh, a good listener actually cuts the burden in half right away.
yeah.
So we encourage you if you're going through any kind of pain in your life right now, in your personal life as a leader, we're here for you.
Right on, right on. Great. I love that saying that any burden shared is by definition half as heavy. And
That's right.
Josh Spurlock taught us, it was at the limbic synchronization or something, right? Where, I feel what you're feeling and you feel understood. It's just, again, those 30 minutes can change your life. So God bless you guys. Thanks so much for being a part of this, caring about leaders the way you do, and taking your mess and making it your message. You know what I mean? Both of you. That's where Converge and, Refined by the Fire came from, was not an in-depth study on some philosophical truth. It was, you both have scars on your soul from what you've been through, but you're willing to talk about it for those that the scars are not yet healed. And it's a wonderful thing. So bless you both. And bless you, our watchers and listeners. Thanks for being a part of this. We're praying for you. This drops on Tuesdays. So it's Tuesday or Monday. Is it Monday or Tuesday? It's Monday.
Tuesdays, yeah.
Tuesdays. I just been doing this for 5 years, so I'm not good at it, but here I am. But yeah, Tuesday. You haven't quit. Like that means you're a winner. So keep going as you continue to lead from a life.